Whether we are there or not, ITSP Magazine still gets the best stories. Plenty of conferences and events spark our curiosity and allow us to start conversations with some of the world's brightest minds. In person or virtually, Sean Martin and Marco Ciappelli go on location and sit down with them at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Together, we discover what the synergy of these three elements means for the future of humanity. High Trust continues to champion programs that safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across industries and throughout the third-party supply chain, collaborating with public and private sector experts in privacy, information security, and risk management to identify emerging threats and help organizations ensure they take the most effective steps to avoid them. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net.
Marco.
Sean.
I'm really sad, man.
You are? Why? Why?
Well, you're not going to be in Toronto.
Oh, I know. Are we starting with this today?
We're starting with this.
I'm not. Well, you know.
I'm going to point out that you're not going to be there. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be smiling. No, not like that.
You love that. You love that. I'm not going to embarrass you when you're there, but.
Well, you do that.
But I love the fact that I'm still part of the chats on the road, which is all the pre-event conversation, and then you're going to have a lot of interesting people to have on the mic when you're there and off the mic, I'm sure. You're not going to record everything, right?
No, I won't let me record everything, and I don't have enough space on my phone anyway. But no, I'm excited to meet lots of new people. Of course, it's an international event. We're talking about Sector, which is the Security Education Conference of Toronto. That's what it stands for. And we've had a few chats already, but I'm excited to meet new people from the Canadian region and from the Toronto area and kind of get a sense of what's going on in Canada or in relation to the US and the rest of the world. And no better way to do that than show up in person, actually shake some hands and meet some folks. So two folks we're meeting today as part of, as you mentioned, Marco, part of our chats on the road to Sector. We have Christine and Dr. Thomas Lee, and they're both presenting on the topic. Let me get this straight here. It's a new people-centric approach to determining an organization's exposure to a third-party data breach. That's a mouthful, just like some of our programs are in security. Christine, Thomas, great to see you.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Great to be here.
Great to have you on. And maybe a bit of background for folks, things you're working on at the moment to kind of set the stage for how this came together. Christine, you first.
Great, fabulous. So Christine Dewhurst, I am here in Toronto. And it was, I sit back to the first time I met Dr. Lee. It was a dark and stormy COVID night in March. There was a snowstorm outside here in the wonderful world of Toronto. And Dr. Lee presented a mathematical model to be able to determine the probability of data breach. And I was mesmerized the whole time. So many neat and exciting things. And I had to reach out right after the meeting to be able to sit down and work through some of these things together. So we met about 2 years ago. I think maybe even 2.5 years now. And we've spent every Monday together for the last 2.5 years, going through discoveries, looking at the math models, attempting to determine how we could potentially use this in a practical sense. Because when you sit there and you talk about the third axiom of mathematics, of probability, a lot of people just kind of go, shh. But if you sit back and you talk about some of the discoveries that we're going to share today, at that point in my career, I was very much sitting back and thinking, you know what, all of the ways and everything that we're doing in cyber isn't working. And I was really taking an introspective and external view of everything, and we need to find new ways to do things. And so today we're really happy to present some of those new ways and new techniques that cyber professionals, people can use that aren't necessarily cyber professionals, to be able to determine who has your data and how to protect it. So happy to be here and looking forward to sharing that new perspective with the world.
I love it. And there are a few moments in time I can look back and think that presentation or that panel, whatever the conversation was, really means something. And I'm glad you two connected to bring together the connection that you had just from hearing each other. Dr. Lee.
Thank you. Well, first, let me explain. I'm a scientist. I'm not a cybersecurity person at all. I'm not a cybersecurity person. Several years ago, just to explain why on earth a scientist would be here at Black Hat. Several years ago, I started a company. I'm in California. I'm in Silicon Valley. And we thought I have a PhD in biophysics. So just silly me, I thought we could design an immune system for the computer. And we came up with some ideas and things. And people that I ran into said, oh, that's a really interesting idea, but it would be much more interesting if you could calculate risk. And it took us quite a few years, but we discovered we could. We developed a model for the cost of a data breach. We've presented that to the Federal Reserve. And then just several years ago, we discovered how to calculate probability for data breach. The reason I'm here is, and the reason Christine heard my talk, is we've been explaining what we've discovered through empirical regression modeling. And I emphasize that I'm not a cybersecurity person. I think because I'm a scientist, not a cybersecurity person, so we cracked the code in how to figure this out. We had to find something we could measure for all companies. And it turns out, as Christine says, staffing levels was the one thing that we could measure. So we figured out how to calculate probability. But that doesn't mean we figured out how to use this information. So sort of the wonderful thing, if it was 2.5 years ago, time flies, but it was running into Christine, who could teach me how something like this could actually be used. And I'd just like to correct her. She said nothing's been working. In fact, what we found is how effective cybersecurity people are. There's no question they're very effective. And the data breaches occur more often because simply companies haven't hired enough of these people. Where we're failing maybe is in managing third-party risk, and then working with Christine. That's our breakthrough, figuring out how to do this. And Christine's a cybersecurity expert, but she also has a degree in mathematics. In fact, she has a bachelor's in mathematics, which to me is very scary. It means while the rest of us were, studying literature and stuff in college, she was pure math. And so that made it very easy for her to understand the modeling that I was presenting. I mean, she could just think in the statistics manner that we needed and how to apply this. So anyway, that's my introduction to me. I'm not a cybersecurity person, and I'm very interested in working with cybersecurity people to show how this model can be used, how this information can be used. And that's what our talk's about. I mean, getting into the talk itself.
So, Shaw, can I just say something?
Of course.
It's interesting what you said, and it's interesting the title, because when I said, okay, we're going to talk with these two folks, they're going to present there, I'm thinking like from a sociological mind and people-oriented mind myself, to be like, oh, they got a solution where people are really at the center of the solution. Meaning, cybersecurity is a human problem, as we've been seeing lately. But then now you're presenting this as it's more of a number problem, more than, it's a quality versus quantity. Am I getting somewhere with this, Christine, maybe? Or Thomas?
Go ahead, Dr. Lee.
Well, I mean, it just, so we it's simple, it's obvious. So, that people would make the difference, and that you need enough of them to get the job done right within your organization. It's that simple, and it's quite obvious. We developed a regression model. There's what we discovered is counting certifications, the number of people with certain certifications was very, very predictive. We could pick out a really small percentage of companies that were responsible for most of the data breaches. So although cybersecurity people think in terms of sort of their training and the work that they do, which are controls, and they sort of view the problem. I know, Christine, that it taught me. You think about vulnerabilities, and you think about threats, and then you think about mitigation. That thinking and that work, if we want to step back and we're thinking about management, the answer is quite simple. You need to hire enough of those people. They know what they're doing. They know their stuff. And that just the likelihood that you're going to have a data breach, we can measure that. Did you hire enough of these people? And it turns out to be very sensitive when you get to very large data breach. Having sufficient staffing is really important.
No, Christine, do you have insights into the type of staffing? Because Dr. Lee mentioned a few things, right? So
she sure does.
You start with risk, you build some policies, you put some controls in place, you run a program for detection and response. All of that takes people. It takes people outside of the security team as well. How do you figure out what that looks like? What is enough, quote unquote?
That's a fantastic question, Sean. So when we looked at, the beauty that COVID night when I met Dr. Lee is he actually looks at 5 things. He looks at the number of people in the organization, the IT staff, CISA, CISSP, and MCSA. And from that, he can, based on how much data you're sharing with that company, we can actually predict what the probability is of data breach. It's people-centric. So instead of sitting down and looking at a questionnaire of do you have AES 256, you're looking at do you have enough people within the organization to be able to fulfill the needs? Do you have a second line of defense with the CISSP? Do you have a CISA that leads your internal audit function? It's looking at those things and shifting up from the data and from the controls to be able to see, do I want to share my data with this company? So one of the items that we explore is if you sit back and a lot of companies right now are looking at translation services. So when you go on a call with somebody, you can actually hit the record and it'll do all of your minutes and it'll do everything. And Dr. Lee and I were in one session and they said, can we record you? And so Dr. Lee and I furiously went on LinkedIn to determine the CISAs and CISSPs and how many people worked in the organization. And within 5 minutes, we went, I don't think we want to do that because they don't have any CISAs or CISSPs in the organization. So they're collecting all of this data from all of these people all over the world. And how are they securing it if they don't have a third line and they don't have a second line and they don't have qualified people? So I said a lot there, but it's super exciting because it's a way that anybody can sit back and look at an organization and say, do I want to give them my SIN number? Do I want to give them my driver's license? Am I comfortable as a company who is the steward for my customers' data? Do I want to share their data? So I'll stop there. Dr. Lee wants to jump in.
Yeah, I do want to jump in. And I'm sorry, Christine, we're not following our plan of what we were going to talk about. But that's okay. I mean, this is how our sessions went. That's by the way, roll. When we met, we
years.
Mostly it was her teaching me. But I think so. We did empirical regression modeling. Empirical means that we discovered what's predictive. So it's not based on theory. It wasn't based on an opinion. We tried, by the way, a lot of different kinds of certifications. We found simply counting the number of people with certifications is really predictive. So you asked what kind of people and so forth. One thing we found is that people with certifications were way more predictive. And so this teaches us one thing. It teaches us that these certification bodies, I'm not saying everybody, but generally every certification we tried was really predictive, and more so than simply counting people that say they work in cybersecurity. This is teaching us that these certifications are really important. What's ever going on, and I have my opinions, I think it's the ongoing training, just like this Black Hat conference. And people need to keep up with this ongoing training or they lose their cert. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think was a really big surprise, it wasn't for me because I didn't even understand what the certs meant, but I do now. And I think a big surprise is that we discovered that a CISA, which is a audit certification, was just as important as a CISSP, which is kind of the more technical aspect of cybersecurity and what most people would say is cybersecurity certification. The discovery that audit was so important, it was just as important. I know that's a surprise because we know the hiring ratios of CISAs, and it's much lower. And so that's one of the big discoveries is how important audit is, and I don't think people recognize that. And then Christine taught me why. All the things that audit does, and the checking, the verification, and things really began to make sense at that point. So that's one take home. Another is she mentioned the MCSA. That is a Microsoft certification. It's now being replaced. Microsoft has new certifications, but why on earth this is not a cybersecurity certification? Why would that be important? And you've got to read a bit between the lines with empirical regression modeling. I think it suggests that training people in IT in the systems that they support, to the extent that they actually get certified, I think that's important. I think that's what the modeling is teaching us. And I've had some CISOs use this to encourage IT to get trained up in the systems that they support. If you've got AWS, if you're using it, maybe your team should be trained in AWS, certified in AWS. Maybe they should be certified in your firewall and so forth.
I have a question, Christine, probably. I mean, as a cybersecurity person, a lot of our experience, and I'm not saying this is not correct. This is definitely correct. But I'm thinking all the people that we know that are in the industry, they come from the hacking community, for example. They may not have certification, but they are recognized really incredible people in the industry that are actually the one that oftentimes think outside the box, which is what we need to do in cybersecurity. So I'm wondering, how do you guys factor these non-certified people, but also extremely qualified for what I know? So I would love your opinion on this.
Definitely. So I will kick off and I will hand over to Dr. Lee. I don't know if you two spoke beforehand, because this is one of his favorite questions, and he's going to talk about the shopping cart. So in math, when you've got a whole bunch of things that act the same way in your model, you can pull one of them out to be a predictor. That doesn't mean that there's not other items that will linearly or non-linearly focus in the same way. And I'm gonna just hand that over to Dr. Lee, because he's going to talk about the shopping cart, and we're going to have great conversations about cereal and milk.
It's so hard to do the shopping cart without doing the slides, but I do have a lot to say regarding that. So first,
save some of it for your session.
Beg your pardon?
Save some of it for your session.
Okay. Yeah. Well, what I find is that people tell me that by the time they've heard the talk, it's like drinking from a fire hose. To view the problem from the perspective of the people, and the idea that you're important and you got to have enough of people like you, is so different than people are used to, cybersecurity people. It's worth hearing several times is what I want to say, and it'll be easier for people to digest. So when we model, just Christine says, it's called collinear. In the modeling process, you can, if you have several factors that turn out to sort of to be the same or similar pattern, in the modeling process, you remove the weaker of them. So that's, otherwise you're just fitting random noise. Not just talk about statistical modeling. So indeed, we tried a lot of certifications. They were all very, very predictive. You need to know every one we tried, but we didn't need them in the model because it didn't improve the accuracy of the model. And our objective was not to rate certifications. It was just to build a really accurate model. So when I say CISSP, it's a proxy for a whole lot of other things that are within the enterprise. It's a proxy for the size of your InfoSec team, really, and perhaps the training and experience of your InfoSec team, just that one cert. But it doesn't mean, another thing to keep in mind is that when we're developing the model, we're developing we've developed it for US data initially. There's 5 to 7 million companies in the United States. What we're really looking for is the difference between the companies that did and did not have a data breach. And so we got to think of something we can measure for 5 to 7 million companies. And a lot of companies, most companies are small. So the CISSP is a certification we can find even among smaller companies, under 500 employees, for example. It doesn't mean that it's the best certification. It's just the most ubiquitous certification. It is a very good certification, but that's how I would interpret it. Christine said the shopping cart. I give that in the talk. I explain how we could maybe imagine we could predict family size by what you see in somebody's shopping cart at the grocery store. And I use milk and cereal as an analogy. Both of them, children like milk, they like cereal. But I don't need both of them in the model. Maybe I could predict family size by measuring how much milk somebody has in their shopping cart. And I could do that with cereal too. But I only need one of those two factors because they're just the same. But so to your question, all of these certifications and a full team size and all the different dimensions are important. And when you look at larger organizations, you see them, all these other kinds of training. You mentioned hackers. Here's the thing to think about is in the modeling, we had to be able to gather the data quickly without too much work. And there's lots of things that you could think of that would be really predictive, but it's just too hard to get that information for 5 to 7 million companies. Information on ethical hackers or even people's experience, I can't answer that. I can't gather that data quickly. And the CISSP seems to be a good proxy, just regard it as a proxy for all these other things. So the comment that I make...
Also independently verifiable, right? If somebody...
Right.
That's right. So, but to the shopping cart, I say that this is a model that an expert like Christine can use. She understands all the other stuff that's in the shopping cart besides milk and cereal. So it's really a tool for the cybersecurity expert. They can turn to management. They can compare a company to their peers, and they can make an argument for all the other things too that we just don't have in the model. But they can make it from the perspective of sufficient staffing. So that's the answer. Everybody's important, and they all have their little piece in preventing data breach. Data breach, by the way, is much more than getting hacked. It's also accidents, lost or stolen devices. There's malicious insiders. All these other things cause data breaches as well. Keep in mind.
And it's not going to be in the shopping cart, Sean. Don't buy that stuff.
Well, it'll be in the shopping cart, but we don't need to. It's in the shopping cart, but my joke is that if I just buy milk for my family, actually in the shopping cart analogy, we say milk and diapers, but my family will get sick. Well, the diapers are my analogy for CISA. They're something completely different. They're not covered by, diapers are for children too young to drink milk, and that would be a good predictor of family size too, but they'd be just the infants in the family. So
I love it. So many questions. Even just is there value in, I don't know if there's a factor to look at that says what happens after a breach? Do we have the right people to help with that? Well, I don't know. I could go all over the place with this, but
that's a whole different talk. Yeah. But I can say that one of the biggest costs is the investigation. Just because we've modeled that cost as well. One cost is lawsuits. So you don't want to do stupid stuff and put stupid things on your website. Like you don't want to say we have best in class security. just better to say you have good security. So because that'll lead to lawsuits, and that's half the cost. But one of the biggest costs we can see from modeling is the investigation cost. And so what you can do for after the data breach, you can do this work before the data breach, is do all sorts of things to speed the investigation. So that might mean turning on access logs, just all the things that you could imagine. You're going to hire a company to come in and do the investigation, know ahead of time what they would do, and do those things beforehand, and you could speed the investigation and lower the cost of a data breach.
Save some money.
I'm so happy to hear you talk about controls, Dr. Lee. You have no idea. After 2.5 years, you're talking about controls of turning on logs.
Yeah, she's saying that because, we couldn't measure controls. So, we found something completely different. And then people say, but what about the controls? And, the important thing is they're important, but they're sort of reflected indirectly when you measure the people. And what I argue is, if you do find a missing control when you're looking at a third party, most likely the root cause is insufficient staffing. And the missing control, of course, is very important. It needs to be addressed, but you also need to address insufficient staffing. They likely have an understaffed audit and security team.
Yeah. So many interconnected things here to paint this web. We're going to leave it here, and hopefully folks are intrigued to come see you on, Wednesday, October 23rd, 2:15, room 801B, for a new people-centric approach to determining an organization's exposure to a third-party data breach. There's that mouthful again. It's part of a Sector Black Hat event in Toronto, 22nd through the 24th. The summit's on the first day, briefings the second and third day. And Christine Dewhurst, Dr. Thomas Lee, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure was all ours.
And thanks everybody for listening and watching. Stay tuned for more coverage from Sector and other events that we're covering throughout the rest of the year, and plenty in the next year as well. And please do subscribe, share with your friends and enemies, and do the math, trust the science. You're muted, Marco. Just like you're going to be when I'm in
I was going to say it's all about the people. So the more people that subscribe, the more we're going to be having this conversation, the better it is. So,
nice one.
Sorry, I was muted. I should have done this before.
You should. I think you've done a few of these. But anyway, thanks. Thank you, Marco, for being here. I'll miss you in Toronto, but we'll see you soon and see everybody else soon as well. Thanks all.
Thank you. Have a great day.
HITRUST continues to champion programs that safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across industries and throughout the third-party supply chain, collaborating with public and private sector experts in privacy, information security, and risk management to identify emerging threats and help organizations ensure they take the most effective steps to avoid them. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Sean and Marco's on-location event coverage conversations. Please take a moment to give the show a good rating and leave a comment. Remember to share this podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues. Come back for more conversations and follow Sean Martin and Marco Ciappelli as they continue their journey toward redefining cybersecurity and society.